technical and financial support to help the countries reduce the cost of energy, diversify the sources and change, hopefully, the base load, and promote the use of more efficient systems, such as energy management technologies, electric vehicles, and of course, energy conservation measures. And in coordination with the Caribbean Development Bank and the Japanese government, we're equally supporting several Eastern Caribbean countries which are not part of our membership, but essentially to help them develop geothermal potential. You know, one of the things that always astonished me on energy is that if you look at a typical Caribbean hotel, about 40% of its variable costs are the costs of energy. So anything that we can do, not only to improve that case, but equally for the citizens of the Caribbean, you know, we have a great opportunity in working closer with the United States, as we have been doing with Jamaica and other countries around renewables, but more importantly, around natural gas. Now, talking a little bit about financial integration. Certainly, the Caribbean needs and requires a financial integration to be able to sustain its own economic progress. We have been working closely with the US and Caribbean stakeholders to help mitigate the impact of de-risking and advance the implementation of counterterrorism and anti-money laundering policies. As I'm sure many of you know, the risking resulted from many of the recent initiatives to combat money laundering, as many foreign banks opted to cut their ties with Caribbean financial institutions to avoid the legal and regulatory complications and largely the cost of this compliance. Although everybody understands the urgency of these measures, it is important to equally acknowledge the consequences, especially on Caribbean economies. Several banks across the region have lost, if not all, most of their correspondent banking relationships. International banks have stopped providing some services and have dropped clients that they consider are high risk. And in many cases, this has undermined a central element of any development economy, which is about financial inclusion, hurting the most vulnerable people and members of society who, as I said earlier, depend on some of those $5 billion of remittances that come every year. Now, the uneven speed of implementation of these de-risking measures has equally affected the flow of financing to Caribbean economies, creating an additional drag on growth. And as an intended consequence, we may see an increase in transactions through informal channels, because if anything, this is a big boost to informality. And that, of course, could complicate the collective efforts that we are all doing to fight drug trafficking and other illicit trade. Now, we at the IDB are providing Caribbean countries the best possible technical assistance that we can bring them to help them weather the transition and, more importantly, the compliance required. We're equally ensuring that they are better informed on US policy actions on these very issues. But I believe we must improve here the dialogue between US authorities and Caribbean authorities to find ways on how to strengthen regulations, while at the same time ensuring that the cost of these changes are more fairly shared across all sides. Now, citizen security is something that we just heard from the panel, but clearly many Caribbean countries face tremendous constraints in providing a safe environment for their people. Violent crime, as we know, occurs at rates that threaten key economic sectors and constrain private sector growth. As has been seen in many US communities that have high crime rates, most violent crime perpetrators and victims in the Caribbean are poor young males. Following, in fact, the study that the rest just showed, the IDB is ready to support member countries to develop and, more importantly, to deploy in a smarter way data-driven tactics to combat crime and violence. Such efforts should help governments turn the tide and achieve better results and returns on their large investments on citizen security. In closing, our goal is to help the Caribbean become a region that is vibrant, that these economies are sustainable, and of course, where as a result, people are happy, safe, and productive. A stable and more prosperous Caribbean can contribute to a safer and more prosperous United States. And I'm convinced that if we work together to help the Caribbean countries overcome its and their development constraints, it is not only the right thing to do, but it's also the smart bet on a better future for our hemisphere. So again, thank you very much for the invitation. We at the IDB look at this in a very strategic way, and we have Therese, who runs our whole Caribbean sector, sitting not in Washington, but in Jamaica, helping all the Caribbean countries. And I really welcome the fact that there is this interest, this law, this commitment on behalf of the US Congress to really put the kind of attention that is needed. If this is done right, I think we can advance significantly. So again, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, President Moreno. A lot of points here that resonate both Caribbean Central and international with the audience. So thank you for that. Our next special guest speaker is Ambassador Kenneth Merton, who's the acting principal